guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you are new. My name is Heather. I'm a homeschooling mom of 3 kids, elementary, middle, and high school age. We are in our 12th year homeschooling this year. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you all of the things that we do not do in our homeschool. This is a collaboration with Davine from Calm the Chaos and Shauna from Homegrown Homeschool, and I will have a link in the description box with the collaboration playlist so that you can see what everybody is not doing in their homeschools. So let's get started. When I was thinking about this topic of what we don't do in our homeschool, I thought it was going to be a little challenging to do. And the reason is because there are so many different methods for homeschooling out there that obviously there are a lot of things that I may not do that other people love doing. And so it was a little challenging for me to put this list together to make it a little bit broader to maybe apply to more homeschoolers than just one particular philosophy of homeschooling. I definitely feel like an eclectic homeschooler. We pull from a bunch of different resources. We use a literature-based model. We do a lot of discussion. We do a lot of passion projects and such. And so yeah, we'll see how this goes. But the first thing that we do not do in our homeschool is participate in a co-op. And I know that that is almost always the first question that I get asked in my Facebook group. I have a Facebook group for Maine homeschoolers called the Maine Homeschool Network. And whenever there is a new member, they are always looking for community. And I think that community is incredibly important, but I have never found a co-op to work for us. And I realized that I'm probably just not a co-op person. Now, when I first started homeschooling, I really didn't know anybody in my area that was homeschooling. And I started when Emma was very young with preschool curriculum and trying to just get into a good rhythm of learning at home. And I didn't really consider co-ops until she was about 7, which was the first year that we had to report to the state that we were homeschooling. And I did find a co-op in our area and it worked pretty well. It was mainly just, art and fun and getting together with other homeschoolers. And I did enjoy that for a little bit of time. But at that point, Emma was 7, Jack he had just turned 5, and Lucy was a baby. And it really was a struggle for us to get there week after week to participate. And we did it for about a semester and then decided that it was just too much for us and we did not want to do it anymore. I spent some time looking for co-ops when Emma was 8 and 9 and 10, and I just could not find anything that really clicked with what I wanted. Now, in my Facebook group, I say if you want to have a community or if you want to have a co-op or a group of homeschoolers, you should do it yourself. And I realized that it was just not my priority to build a group to get together with during the week with other homeschoolers. It just wasn't necessary for me because I had my own community already of friends and kids. Even though all of my kids' friends are public schooled, we had our group and it wasn't necessary for me to have that extra community just focused on homeschool. As my kids have gotten older and Emma is in high school now, I don't feel like we have the time to put into a co-op. And I think that might be because of the wide range of ages in my kids. Lucy is in 2nd grade and Emma is doing 2nd year high school work. So I think that that is probably a big reason that I've just decided co-ops are not for us. Now, that does not mean that a co-op is a bad thing. I think co-ops are great, but I really just want to teach my kids what I want to teach my kids. I don't feel the need to rely on a co-op situation. And I also know that I am not a teacher for other people's kids. I do not do well teaching other people's kids, and that is something that I recognize in myself. The whole point of a co-op is everybody is cooperative in the group. Everybody's a teacher or a helper and doing something to further the education of this group of students. And that's just not me. Now, if there was a group where we could just hang out once in a while with other homeschoolers, that's the kind of group that I would like. But I'm not good with schedules. I'm not good with being on somebody else's timeline. So we do not do co-ops in our homeschool. The next thing that we do not do in our homeschool is poetry tea time. Now, I hear about poetry tea time all of the time, and there have been seasons where we have read poetry at lunch and had snacks and such, but it is not often. And I think part of this is because I don't actually like poetry. Okay, I take it back. Music I love, and music is a form of poetry, but poetry books, I could take it or leave it. Now, we've been using Sunlight. I think we're in our 13th level this year of using Sunlight, which is a literature-based homeschool curriculum, and there is always a poetry book in the level that we purchase. Every year there is a new poetry book, and I will read through those things occasionally, but we do not do a ton with poetry. We do not have a set day in the week to do poetry tea time. It's just not something that my kids care about. We do sometimes pass around a poetry book at lunch, and we'll each read a poem and laugh about them and move on. But poetry tea time is not a focus in our homeschool. And along the same vein, the next thing that we do not do is an artist or composer study. I think that that's kind of Charlotte Mason. I think poetry tea time and the artist/composer study, those are very Charlotte Mason-like things that you do in your homeschool. I have never felt the need to do that. Do we do art in our homeschool? Absolutely. Do we play music and write music and learn instruments in our homeschool? Absolutely. But I have never done artist or composer studies with my kids. Now, if they were interested in a particular composer, that would be fine. We have listened to so much classical music over the years, and, we have watched things about composers, but never with the intent to study a specific composer. So I don't say, oh, we're going to study Mozart this term. That's never a thing that we have done, and it's not something that I think is really necessary. Now, if the kids wanted to study a composer or an artist, that would be absolutely fine, and I would find the resources for them to do that. But my kids prefer to do the things, like they would rather do the type of art that an artist does, or write music like a composer does, or play music. And so instead of learning about other people that have done these things, they will work on those skills themselves, and I find value in that. So we do not do artist or composer studies in our homeschool. The next thing that we do not do in our homeschool, which I think that is pretty standard for most veteran homeschoolers, is we do not follow the public school standards. Now, when I first started homeschooling, I absolutely tried to make sure that I hit on every single thing that the public school was doing when Emma was like 4, 5, 6, before we were even officially homeschooling in the state of Maine, because when we started homeschooling, the compulsory age was 7, and now it's 6. But before we were officially homeschooling, I was printing out the standards from our local public school, what they were learning each term, the benchmarks that they were trying to hit, and trying to make sure that I did all of that stuff, as well as fitting in all of the homeschool curriculum and resources that I wanted to use with Emma. It was miserable. I don't know why I tried to do that. And honestly, like if you take a really top-down look at what we were doing for homeschooling, we were hitting all of those things, but it wasn't the specific topics within those standards. For instance, like the butterflies. We didn't study butterflies when she was in kindergarten. We had already done that when she was 4. So it was not necessary for us to do it again, but I was like, oh, maybe we ought to be doing butterflies again this year, because that's what they're doing in the public school. So we do not take to the public school standards. Now, I think that obviously there's There's two sides of this coin. You want your kids to be able to follow the path that they want as they continue their education. If you are only homeschooling for a very short period of time, I know a lot of people that homeschooled during COVID put their kids back in school once the public schools opened again. And in those times, I can see that you would want to make sure that your kids are staying up with their public school peers. However, for us, we are long-term homeschoolers. We are in it until the end. We've been homeschooling for 12 years now. So I want to make sure that I am preparing them for life after they graduate high school, but I also don't feel the need to put the pressure on myself to make sure that they are doing exactly what the public schools are doing. Part of the reason that we are homeschooling is because I want to decide what we are learning about, and I want my kids to have educational autonomy and make sure that they want to learn what they're learning as well. So that they actually learn it instead of memorizing something for a test later on. So, in which case they don't remember it. I am realizing this as I am teaching geometry to my oldest at the moment, that I don't even remember geometry from high school. Anyways, so we do not take the public school standards into account when we are planning our homeschool year, when we are doing our day-to-day homeschool stuff. That is just not a concern of ours. I think that a lot of new homeschoolers are really, really worried about making sure that they are at grade level. They are doing exactly what their public school counterparts are doing. And to me, that's not necessary. And part of that is because I know that homeschooling is a marathon, it is not a sprint. Part of it is because I know that we are homeschooling for the long run. We are not just homeschooling for a year. We don't take it year by year. We have made the decision, my husband and I, to homeschool, and that is what we are doing. And so even though there are challenges within our homeschool, just like any parent would have challenges with any child in any learning environment, we work through those challenges, and we know that we are going to continue for the long run. Just as people who decide to put their kids in public school, they don't say, oh, we're going to take it on a year-by-year basis. They are just in public school, and that is what they do. So we try to make sure that the kids are progressing, and that is the most important thing. Now, especially in the early elementary years, kids are at all different levels, and they are at all different levels in public school and in private school or in charter school. There is nothing that will say your child is going to be at this particular level. Instead, there is a line that a board or a committee somewhere decided that a 7-year-old should know these things, an 8-year-old should know these things, a 9-year-old should know these things. And so that doesn't really take into account the individual student. And obviously in public school, you cannot do that because you are teaching a class of 20 to 30 students. And so you have to have an average, a line that you are teaching to and trying to bring kids up to that line. And then if people are exceeding that line, you know, maybe you give them extra reading. I'm really not sure what they do to advance kids faster in public school. But in homeschool, we have the opportunity to teach to their ability level. And so we can move as fast or as slow as we need to based on the individual student. And that is the main reason that we do not follow the public school standards. Now, as we get into high school, Emma is taking a pretty traditional college prep course load, and that is because she wants to go to college. We would like to set her up to go to college. If she decides not to go to college or to take a gap year or whatever, that is absolutely up to her. But I want to set her up for whatever she wants to do in the future, and college prep work is part of that for our homeschool. That does not mean that it is for every student, and it may be different for my younger two. I'm not sure because they are not in high school yet, so we will see. But for Emma, she is on a college prep track, and that's just how we are doing it, but that does not mean that we follow the public school standards. Okay. I hope that that was a good enough explanation for that. The next thing that we do not do in our homeschool is grading. We do not do any grades before high school. And I think that that can be a little bit jarring for people to hear, but grading is not important before high school. When I am homeschooling my kids, I'm fully engaged with them and their work day to day. So I know if they are understanding it, and if they are not understanding it, we slow down, we look for different resources to make sure that they do understand it before they continue on. But because I know if my kids are getting content and remembering content and applying content, there is no need for a grade. When they get to high school, obviously, we do need to do some grading, primarily for transcripts, if your student is college bound or, whatever their plans are after high school, you really have to take that into account when you're in high school. We are grading things in high school so that I can create a transcript for Emma, and that is going great. She's already completed 1 year of high school level courses, and we're in our second year, and grading is not that difficult once you actually sit down to do it. Things that are very easy are math. That's very easy to grade. Her Spanish is actually really easy to grade because it's based on tests and work done. Like if she's getting the correct answers, she's doing well. If she's not, then she needs to redo it. So those types of things are easy. And then as far as history and English, those things can be a little bit more challenging to grade, but if you create a rubric of, here is the top, here's the middle, and here's the low of what you want to cover in the year, it makes it a little bit easier. I know a lot of different high school curriculum does have ready-made rubrics for you to use, which you can adapt to your own homeschool, especially if you aren't using every single part of every single curriculum, and you have to kind of pick and choose things. You just have to make a rubric for yourself. There is a great book called Setting the Record Straight by Lee Binns. I recommend it to everybody that is homeschooling high school. It goes through all kinds of grading. It goes through transcripts. It has tons of examples, writing course descriptions for college admissions, all of that stuff. It's really helpful. But prior to high school, there is no reason to grade anything. Unless your state requires you to submit grades for particular subjects, then obviously you would want to do that. In my state, we do teacher evaluations, so the teachers are looking for progress, and that is obviously based on an individual student. I try to make sure that my kids complete their full curriculum each year, and we do make progress each year, and I'm not concerned about grades prior to high school. And even in high school, I probably shouldn't be as concerned. Now, I do have to make the caveat that we do correct things before high school, but I don't need to necessarily grade things, like to give an A or a B or a number grade. But things like math, obviously we correct it. If it's not correct, we want to go over why it wasn't correct. Things like spelling or grammar, we do correct that. I don't take the red pen of death to every single writing piece. And in fact, I do very little correcting that way. We just kind of go over things, or I will read their work aloud and say, oh, could you have done this? Or could we have done this differently? I want it to be more discussion based rather than you've done this, and this wrong. Outside of that individual work, I will say, let's make sure that we capitalize the first word in a sentence, and, make sure that you use punctuation and all of that kind of stuff. Or if there's a word that they're not spelling correctly often, I will have them, write it out. So there is correcting done, but it's done in a way so that my kids aren't stressed about grades. Now, sometimes my kids ask for grades and I will give them a grade, but that's not all of the time. It's usually more at the beginning of a school year when they're really excited about new resources that they're using and they want to see how they're doing. And it's mainly when my kids are really little. Like Lucy will say, "How did I do today?" And I will say, "You got an A," and I give her a sticker and she's really excited. So that is okay, but for the grand scheme of things, we do not grade before high school. The next thing that we do not do in our homeschool is use curriculum exactly as it is written. Now, when I first started homeschooling, I really tried to follow all of the rules. I wanted to follow the instructor's guide to a T. Like I said, we use Sunlight for the base of our curriculum and have for 12 years now. So I was always trying to make sure that I was doing exactly what it said. And that was incredibly overwhelming to me. So I realized that some of the things were not necessary. Some of the questions were not necessary. And over the years, I've realized that I understand how I want to teach my kids, and I understand the resources that we're using a lot more. Part of that is because I spend a lot of time in the summer doing prep work before our year begins, really understanding the resources that we're using. When my kid, and because I've used a lot of the resources for elementary, going on the third time now with Lucy, I don't need to do as much prep work for that stuff as I do for Emma. Obviously, new resources every year as she's my oldest. So I will spend time reading books, pre-reading books, looking at the questions, figuring out if there are other points that I want to make about different resources that we are using, but I don't need to follow the curriculum exactly as it's written. Curriculum is really just a tool for you to use to help your kids learn and grow in their education. So if something is not working, you can change it. It does not mean that you have to use every single bit of every single piece of curriculum that you own. That can be incredibly overwhelming. You do not have to use every question the way it is written in an instructor's guide. If you are reading, I'm talking more about my older kids now. When we are reading books together, I don't need the questions from the instructor's guide because we have our own discussion, and there are things that we point out and I point out. I have read all of the information in the instructor's guide, and obviously we do use a lot of it, a lot of the notes to parents and some discussion questions. We definitely use those. But if we're having a great discussion about history and touching on all of the points that we've been working through in a particular week, I don't find the need to then also go and make the kids answer all of these other questions that aren't really applicable at this point because we've had such great discussion ahead of time. So you do not have to use every single bit of every single piece of curriculum that you buy. You can change things around. You can change the order of things. You can use an instructor's guide as a guide. You don't have to follow it to a T. And so that is another thing that we do not do in our homeschool. It took me a long time to get there. I think probably around when Emma was in 4th grade was when I started to realize that I did not have to follow everything exactly as written. And it took a little bit of time for me to manage that and figure it out. But once I let go some of that stress that I was putting on myself to use the guide exactly as written, things just got so much better in our homeschool. And that has continued as Jack is coming up through the levels and now Lucy is coming up through the levels. The last thing that we do not do in our homeschool is finish books that we do not like. And I know that this is probably going to be another one that people are like, oh, sometimes you just got to read a book. And yes, I definitely agree that there are some books that my kids have read that they haven't particularly enjoyed or wanted to stop. But I'm a reader. I love reading books, and my kids also really love reading books. And so if there is a book that they are not connecting with, we put it away and we find a different book. And because there are so many books in the world, I mean, you can find 1,000 books on one particular concept that you may be trying to cover in your English class. And if one book doesn't work, there is nothing wrong with putting it down and choosing a different book. Now, In life, will they have things that they have to do that they don't want to do? Absolutely. But one of my goals for homeschooling, it's always been about finding a love of learning and giving my kids the tools that they need in order to seek out the information that they need and want to learn. And so if there is a book that they really do not connect with and do not want to read, they are not learning from that book. And I know that that can be hard to hear, but if you think back to your own school experience, I'm sure that there were books that you just got through to get through for a test and you have forgotten them. And that is definitely the case for me. And so I'm not sure that spending the time on those types of books is worthwhile to my kids. I don't think it's furthering their learning, because if you are only reading a book just to get through it for a particular test and then you move on, what is the point of reading that book? Is there something that you have gained from that book, or is it just something that has made you feel like you hate reading and you do not want to participate in English class anymore? So I think that there are so many books available. You can always find a different book. Now, if your kids really hate reading in general, that might be a little bit harder to overcome. And in those cases, I always recommend reading aloud and looking to audiobooks and dramatizations of books and graphic novels based on other literature. And it kind of makes it a segue into that book. You know, there are other ways to get your kids interested in reading. But if you have kids that love reading like I do and they do not like a book, I think that it's okay to put it aside and move on to something different. And we have done that a lot this year with Jack. I picked out a whole slew of books at the beginning of the year last summer, and he read about 2/3 of them. And the other third, he just was not at all interested in. And I'm not going to force it because I don't think it's necessary. Is he still reading every day? Yes. And we're still discussing his books. He's still doing narration. He's still completing his language arts worksheets, and he's completing his writing projects, but he is not reading every single book that I chose for him this year. He is now choosing his own books, and that is absolutely totally okay with me. Yes, so those are some of the things that we do not do in our homeschool. I know that there are more things that we do not do. We don't really hold to anybody else's schedule. We don't have a particular start time for our homeschool. We don't, we don't take as many breaks as other people do. We tend to do learning most days, and that is what works for my kids. Yeah, so I think that I really enjoyed making this video. I hope that it was informative to you and that you got some encouragement on some of the things that we do not do and maybe you don't particularly like in your homeschool. I think that if there are things that you really don't like in your homeschool or that your kids aren't enjoying, it's totally okay to drop it. Obviously, you don't want to drop like math or reading or writing, but shifting your thinking about how you present those different ideas, I think, can be incredibly helpful and remove a lot of stress from your homeschool. So again, I will have the link to the playlist in the description box if you are interested in finding out more from other homeschoolers. If you are interested in talking more about homeschooling and getting encouragement on learning and a love of learning, we have a lot of discussion going on right now in my Patreon community. I would love for you to come check it out. I have a link in the description box for that as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and I will see you in the next one. Thanks guys, bye.